Slice of Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Today, I am joined by Navya Davuluri, the co founder and CEO at Curie AI. How are you today?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm pumped to have you on the show today. I think we should kick things off by you telling us a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about Curie AI.
Absolutely. Hi everyone. I'm Navya Davuluri. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Curie AI. My background: I'm trained as a biomedical engineer. Went to University of Southern California for my PhD. For the past 10 years or so now, I've been working in creating products slash technology for monitoring a variety of chronic conditions. For the past 5 years now, my focus has been in the respiratory space. And about Curie, so Curie AI, it is a tech-enabled respiratory care company. We provide virtual personalized disease management of conditions like COPD, asthma, and we do this through proprietary passive detection, symptom detection AI, and a specialized clinical team. So essentially, the symptom detection AI, it is entirely passive. It results in high adherence, reduction in adverse events, and early detection of deterioration.
And let's talk about leveraging AI basically to one of the things. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about and we'll kind of dive into more is leveraging AI to capture sleep noises and patterns to proactively get ahead of COPD and other respiratory issues. Can you talk more about like maybe around the benefits of AI in this scenario?
Sure, Jared. Basically, if you look at how COPD and other respiratory conditions are managed, patients with these conditions are currently told to manage their condition by subjectively assessing their symptoms every day. So they're supposed to really understand, are they picking up shortness of breath? Is their mucus presence increasing, etc. And depending on the subjective assessment, they have to choose the type of medication they're going to use. For example, in COPD or asthma management, they switch between different types of inhalers based on the severity of the symptoms and the type of symptoms they're experiencing. But oftentimes, patients find it extremely hard to manage their condition because of this burden of subjective assessment of their own health. So, this is where Curie AI comes in. We are leveraging AI to objectively assess the symptoms the patient is experiencing and thus are removing the burden from the patient, and using the AI technology to identify these symptoms automatically through audio-based technology. And now, because the patients don't have to do it themselves, we help them understand every day what type of symptoms they're experiencing, their severity, etc., and are able to support them in easily managing their condition.
So the way respiratory issues are currently being managed today isn't so great, right? In the broader just in the industry. Um, but when you look at like diabetes gets a ton of recognition. Uh, that you always hear about the treatment methods, right? Why is it that so many Americans suffer from respiratory issues? And then also, does that have something to do with it that we're not that the treatment options aren't as often discussed and as much as like something like diabetes?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Jared. So, if you look at diabetes management, as you pointed out accurately, so there's a lot of innovation that happened in diabetes management, especially in the last 10 years, right? So, with advances in monitoring technology, especially with recently continuous glucose monitoring becoming widely adopted, it has become extremely easy for patients to be able to manage their own diabetes because they have this easy to use objective assessment that tells them every day, for example, what their glucose levels are, and they have the education to basically adjust the insulin dosages accordingly. But if you, in the contrast, if you look at respiratory conditions, there isn't any objective assessment that is as easy to use that helps them understand every day what their respiratory health looks like, right? So that is the fundamental missing piece that is making it extremely harder to basically manage the respiratory conditions. So a lot of burden is on the patients to self-assess and then to self-medicate, which usually leads to low adherence to treatment plan. So that's, yeah, that is how, diabetes management and respiratory management are fundamentally different.
Now, let's talk about how COVID made respiratory issues, like, how does it make them worse?
Right. So so patients that have underlying respiratory conditions, their lung health is already impaired. Now, COVID, it being a condition that affected, adversely the lungs, these were the patients that were amongst some of the hardest hit patients because of COVID. So their access to care has become a lot worse. One, if they contracted COVID because their lungs were already in poor condition, they were oftentimes the patients that were hospitalized frequently. Also, it resulted in a lot of deaths as well in this patient population. So and these patients were also the people that hesitated to go to see their physician in person during the entire time pandemic has been going on, and thus access to care became quite became quite big problematic. Have not been going in to see their specialist as often as they should have. So oftentimes when I visit practices, what I'm hearing now, pre COVID, if patients were recommended to come in every 3 to 6 months, now they're coming in almost an year later. And a lot has happened within this year and without the specialist having, seeing these patients. So, yeah, impact of COVID on these patients has been extraordinary.
Let's switch our focus to COPD again. Let's go through, what do big health systems think about things like COPD and asthma?
Right. I mean, if you look at out of all of the chronic conditions, that people suffer from in the U.S., COPD is the third leading cause of death, and is probably the only chronic condition that is continuing to become worse. So, diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, there's been a lot of innovation, as I pointed out too, that have resulted in really positive patient outcomes over the last few years. But COPD continues to become worse. Readmission rates, hospitalization rates are really high in COPD patients. Health systems are really noticing, the high healthcare utilization that is happening because of COPD, and are starting to come up with programs, especially around remote patient monitoring, to be able to understand the respiratory health of these patients better, and to be able to understand if proactive interventions can be provided. Oftentimes, though, again, um, because of the limitations around how these patients could be monitored. Right now, the current standard of care usually is around monitoring them through devices like pulse oximeters, spirometers, etc., that don't have a lot of adoption amongst the elderly population. Health systems are often finding it difficult to even monitor patients remotely. So, a lot of health systems are looking at innovative ways for passively being able to monitor the patients. And this is where Curie AI really can fill that need for advanced monitoring that is extremely easy to use and completely passive.
My last question to you is around why healthcare is always the last adopter when it comes to things like AI. Like, why is healthcare so slow to adapt in regards to AI and I guess other technologies? But let's focus in on AI for this question.
Well, There is, I wouldn't necessarily say that there has been slow adoption. I mean, of course, when compared to things like enterprise software and whatnot, yes, it is slower. Oftentimes in healthcare, there are a lot more regulations, like FDA regulations, and in terms of the demographics of the patient population, also usually elderly, population that have different varieties of condition. The providers, if you look at especially pulmonology, 30% of all the pulmonologists in this country are 75 and above. So not a lot of exposure towards technology, and not a lot of health literacy as well, which is why the barriers to adoption has been slower, but definitely over the past 5 to 6 years, especially, it has become better. There are a lot of AI solutions that are being adopted in, for example, early stroke detection, in improving operational efficiency within hospitals, etc. So it's getting there, slower than other areas, but there is increased adoption.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Uh, real quick, if you want to add this, but what's next for you and the company?
Uh, so what's next? We are gaining increased traction within several market segments, Jared. So we're really excited about starting to work with independent practices, starting to work with larger health systems. We are bringing few strategic investors and partners on board. So super excited about the growth that we'll be seeing over the next year or so. Yeah.
Well, definitely keep us in the loop. We look forward to those announcements and seeing your continued success.
Thank you, Jared. Yes, absolutely. I will. Yes, I will continue to keep you in the loop.